Morning, everybody. So I'm Neil Walker. I'm from Atkins. I'm just going to introduce myself very briefly and get straight into the content of my slide this morning. So I've been working primarily in water utilities internationally in the UK, Australia, the Middle East and Africa. I've always lent towards technology, but I'm not a traditional 55K. So when I talk about asset management, I give it a slightly different spin. I've set myself a challenge today to try and get too much into a presentation. So I'm going to go quite swiftly, but there will hopefully be time at the end for some brief questions, and hopefully I'll address them there. This first slide was actually developed back in February when I was thinking about some of the rapid evolution that was going on in asset management, and I started to ask myself lots of questions, and I was thinking very much about, what is asset management about? What do we need to do to make it better? How's it fitting with all of these new challenges, the historical challenges? And I'm not going to go through all the words on the slide today, but I think even back then, before the events that have now taken over in the last few months, there was already a need to be reevaluating what we were doing in the asset management world. And I wasn't really thinking of rapid adaptation. I was really thinking, about technology, environmental challenges. But as you've heard from Jonathan already, imagine the impact of coronavirus 5 years earlier, and now those shifting priorities. I think what we really need to do in asset management is give confident decision making a chance. Make sure those decision making frameworks have the best information they possibly can. So I'm going to just quickly skip on to some of the more pertinent questions about, this disrupted era. And in this disrupted era, when we're talking about embracing technology, or how actually within asset management itself, you see these sort of two divergent tribes, if I want to call them that. These sort of splitting out of these different groups. You've got your traditional asset managers who are very much into fixed and capital assets, and you've got these sort of digital asset managers talking a sort of different language. And I started to think about having all these different conversations with different personas. I'm getting excited by economists that tell me the world that needs to change. And I thought, well, how does this all come together? And actually, are we really measuring the right things? We're talking about the right capitals, and what is it ethically, what should our businesses ethically be doing nowadays in terms of the amount of investment it's making and where that needs to go. So I'm moving along. I actually went back in time. I thought, well, where did you start? And I thought about when I was back at work, and again, some of the things that James and Jonathan were just saying. I was thinking, well, my job actually was that person. When I started as a process technician in the water industry, I used to have to go and change chart recorder pens. I used to have to collect the data manually. So I changed these pens, and then I entered the world of science. I had these, chart recorder, look at that. It looks really flash. Isn't that smart? And this is back in 2000. I'm not as old as I look. And then I saw these huge piles of paper, and I thought, what's all that? And then I realized that that's the information. It's going nowhere. It's stacked up. There's all this paper. And I thought to myself, I wonder what you could do if you could operationalize that. And that was 20 years ago. And I don't think that has actually changed. Even though here today I'm sat in my bedroom on television, I didn't imagine this would be my working life, but that's where I started from. So I took that into my thinking, and I went back to basics, and I started to think about these four personas. I mentioned the economists that are telling me that the world's changing. We need transformational programs that measure 6 capitals. And yet I'm an engineer thinking, I just want to build stuff and create solutions. And then control engineers, systems thinkers talking about how they can automate my engineering. And then these technologists taking a view of, well, actually, if I give you these products and tools, you don't need to do those things anymore. And I thought, but they're all talking about assets, and are they all managing assets in the same way? And who's actually the asset manager? So I started to think about how we can reframe that a little bit. So here's my attempt, and I'll make an apology now. I've probably not got it right, but it's good to share these views and get the conversation going, particularly now as we heard there's the strategic asset management plans might not be changing, but we are having to make different decisions and reprioritize some activities. And asset management isn't just long-term thinking. It needs to shift right into the operational phase as well and make sure that it's fully connected. So I've mentioned the different areas of asset management, and there's sort of 7, some say 8 different areas of asset management. I could draw a line right down the middle and say finance is the pivot point, but we've got heavy capital, physical assets on the left, and then we've got this digital realm on the right. And as I said, there's kind of a split. Some people lean to the right, some people to the left. But if you took the definition, which I've put in its fullness on the slide, it talks about it may be tangible and intangible assets. Well, I'm starting to think this needs to be updated, because in my view, it should apply to tangible assets and those intangible assets as well. Full asset management isn't just about physical asset management. And whilst we're saying it, we're not actually doing it. So for me, reframing asset management is about how can we take this and actually adapt it so we've got complete asset management. And then we've drawn this little picture on the right, because to do that, we're going to need to think about the actual assets and the groups of assets that we interact with and their function, which is what Jonathan was saying about workforce, how we're interacting with the assets is changing potentially, but there's still a job to do. So I created 4 group areas, and I'm using the personas in the background, and I started to think about systems of function, as I've called them, are just, it's the built environment, it's those heavy assets, it's pipes, it's pumps, it's buildings, it's roads, it's rail, it's all the physical built environment. It's the traditional realm of the engineer. It's the stuff we design, build, operate and maintain to make our lives much more comfortable and satisfying. And in this challenging time, we've had to rely very heavily on our systems of function, and we've tested them and re-baselined them in terms of their performance. We're seeing some very interesting data coming through, that's going to change the way we're looking. I got a new term last night. It was anthropause. What are we going to learn from anthropause? What does that mean? But there's constantly these new words coming and new insights that we're gaining. But in my vision here, I've talked about engineering technology, which encompasses pretty much all those physical assets that I can imagine, and every type was just in this group. And I think if we started to look at those assets actually generate the data, so that data is, the size of the asset, the age, the condition, its operating data, it's sort of, obsolescence, its manufacture, all of that stuff we've pretty much already got. And we're using it. And again, I think it was referenced previously, we're using that, we connect it to some point solutions. We've maybe got some products that work with some of that data, but information management is changing and it's becoming much more agile. So then my second set of assets are these control assets, my science world. When I went into the treatment plant and I saw these flashing knobs and buttons, it looked a bit like Star Wars. That for me is great. And this is what actually attracted me into the industry. But I also recognized that this stuff goes out of date really quickly. I saw that, your PLCs and your SCADAs and all this stuff it's got a very short shelf life because science is moving, technology is moving, and the operational technology is at the bottom of the technology stack. The data flowing off engineering tech into OT is creating information for automation. There's a mouthful, but that said, once it's in there, we can do so much with it. And these engineers have been working to automate, make my operation of those plants easier. But in these systems of control, we've also got a challenge because as those assets erode, they're facing compressive disruption from new products and technology, which is being overlaid. So what do we need to do here to make sure that we've got resilience in our physical assets? And now I'm moving into the technology assets, because I think there's a group of assets here that is facing serious compression. And I'm deliberately avoiding IIoT because everyone thinks that's the absolute solution. But maybe the solution's more down to the information management and understanding that digital foundation. So then I move to systems of record. And this is the realm of the IT technologist. The big enterprise platforms sit here. We've got a world of amazing stuff coming in. And again, being fascinated by Star Wars, I said, think about distributed cloud. We've got AI. We've got all these fantastic disruptors, as they get called, coming at us. And how do we interact with them? How do we design our IT infrastructure? But our IT technologists talk also about networks. They talk about volumes, and it's very similar to our engineers, but they're not maybe working together in quite the way we need them. So there's a role for asset management there, I think, as well. And when we've got these heavy enterprises, we can render really fascinating insights and do analytics. And that's something that we need to embrace. So I'll move to my final sort of quadrant, if I like, and this is about the systems of action. And in here, I'm talking really about the decision-making capability, the knowledge assets of an organization. And I really started to think about how do we automate some of this? Do we have automated interventions because our systems are fully integrated? We've got robotic opportunities here to make sure that our customers can enter that value chain. They can see our understanding. We're sharing openly with the regulator. There is a desire for open source, but we've got cyber resilience risk. So the more I go through this, you can just hear the sheer volume of questions we've got to try and answer. And frankly, I think asset management has a significant role to play in answering a lot of those questions. I'm going to move to the next one, which is really just thinking about the boundary of your organization. So we typically follow the 55K principles. We have a vision and a policy, and we set strategies. We may have benefit framework, so we're measuring the impact of our decisions and what they led us to, and using that to do our financial investment prioritization. But there's some other things, and I've just bracketed there, the sort of integrated 6 capitals approach there. And if we were to move to the right, thinking about sustainable development goals, and if we engineer better connected enterprises and better connected assets, we're creating an opportunity to see things differently and measure things differently. And if we do that as asset management, I think we move into this picture, which is kind of the summing up piece, if you like, where you see at the middle, I've got just asset management, all 7 as one green box that rotates. And then I've got the asset groups. And around them, I've got this kind of systems ring. And really what that ring represents is, resilience in the round, I guess you could say. I've heard that used by the regulator, but for me, it's the interconnectivity of systems to interact, not with disruption, but more to engage with the forces around us. And climate change, it's massive. Technology disruption will continue. Our ability to maintain markets and work within them, organizations in a sustainable way that keeps people actively engaged and busy in the right ways. We've got huge disruption on us. And as I said, when I sat down, beginning to look at this in February, I was really thinking about environmental and technology change, and then socioeconomic, political just took over. And as a result, I'm now thinking about all of the decision-making frameworks and how they're getting the right information to drive that. And we heard about, building use and getting people back to work safely, and building back better. There's another big term that we're using now in that area. So all of this comes together and you say, wow, right, okay, so we've got a job on our hand. I guess the presentation today was really just to say, we need to take a broader look at this and perhaps reframe it. And here's my first vision. I've gone very fast through there, and hopefully given plenty of time for some good questions. I'll just go and say thank you, and let's see what questions come back. Thanks.
Neil, thanks very much indeed. That was really interesting. I think you need a superhuman. There's a lot of a lot of expertise needed for an asset manager of the future. And one thing that, of course, the first question we came through here, and there were questions coming through, was about what about the IoT? So I'm going to do that in a minute, because you dismissed that out of hand. But no, let's. It's a very important thing outside. But no, so in terms of the people that you think make great asset managers of the future, you've got the infrastructure, you've got all those existing resources, you've got all those traditional roles, but also then digital. You talked about how to really to translate along that scale so that everyone can talk about digital and traditional infrastructure in the same way. It can talk. What do you need from asset managers? What do you need this job to be? Or how should the job change, do you think, Neil, to help companies come through not only what we've been through recently, but to be really successful with customers in the future?
Yeah, I've got to be careful how I answer that. I answer it in different ways depending which persona I'm speaking to. I guess I've been accused of being unfair to traditional asset managers who've done a great job for years in measuring physical assets and really driving that data out and helping organizations make great decisions. To answer the question as to what do we need, it's actually the collaboration word is there.
Right.
I don't believe, and you say a superhuman, I think a future asset manager, a truly strategic asset manager, can interact confidently with all 4 of those personas. They're happy with the economist. They understand the engineering and the functions of the systems and buildings or whatever they're working with in their own respective utility. They're confident also about the rate of change in technology, because they can communicate there. They're acting as a sort of interpreter, if you like, across the 4 boxes. Yeah. And I think that's the role. It's almost to interpret what's going on, but essentially provide the governance as well. These systems that we have are there for a reason. Regulatory compliance is massively important. But as we've not really mentioned, and I didn't really have time to go into the whole people factor, this is the most important thing. We need to keep our workers and society at large connected with our systems and make sure that they're seeing everything we do in an open way. And that's another role for the asset manager. So long question is, act as an interpreter and be that kind of bridge between the 4 areas.
Yeah. And, of course, every business, not least utilities, are thinking about customer first information in. So I suppose what you need to do is have a view of what, of ultimately what your company is trying to achieve, the best service for your customers, whether they're vulnerable, whether they're not. Really, every job within a business now needs to have a passion for the people that you serve.
Absolutely. And I think just to add to what you're saying there, I always lean to the water industry, so forgive me, I am biased, but that's just what I know. But water's a resource of the commons. It's actually the people's resource, and we have those of us that were empowered to deliver the service of water supply. If you're passionate about it, you recognize that you were just providing an essential service, and that people had a right to understand, and society needs to know what you're doing there. And if we can't get to a state where we're actively allowing them to contribute to our data, interact with our organization in a way that's different to today. And I think that's what the challenge really is. And if I was to mention, using customer data to drive decision making is clearly part of the design. That future architecture that we're working on will have better interconnectivity with our customers. But let's not forget the point that the resources are available to everyone. Yeah. We may, as an organization, be abstracting and delivering them through, the application of chemicals or, providing that. But in truth, let's go back to the commons, and those resources are everyone's.
You mentioned data. Let's talk about data, and let's talk about data sources, and let's go straight into the Internet of Things, because the question came straight away. Look, yes, this is I use the word very broadly, the cloud of information and potential and data that's out there that could feed into understanding what customers' preferences are, what their behaviors are like and stuff. Look, I mean, do you think that this is a challenge too far for an asset manager, or do you think that can, in time, become a driver for much better asset managers?
Yeah, very mixed opinions on this. I mean, 7 years ago, I was building a control room in the Middle East. Yeah. And it was a traditional architecture, with cables. We weren't relying on the internet for transfer of data so much because of the security risks, or, we were still transmitting on radio frequencies back then. We were using high frequency radio to transmit data from remote assets 350 miles away from the control room. Yeah. I think about that design then, I think about what we could do now. And I'm actually, despite saying maybe unfavorably towards IoT, it is part of the solution. It will collapse the tech stack. It will bring more data into enterprises. And I think that's key to re-engineer that infrastructure with embracing technology. But I mentioned compressive disruption. I haven't really touched on that too much, because if you go too fast too soon, you can overburden your existing capability. And what that means is you squash the value you've already got in existing assets. And my message here is about, we need to extract all of the current value from those assets before we leap too forward and replace them with flashy new things. Yeah. Those chart recorders that I mentioned very beginning there about my own journey, the analog signals that go behind them and the sort of 4 and 20, they're still there. They haven't changed, and they're still doing what they do. Yeah. Transmitting it via IoT takes out other infrastructure in the IT stack. So it is very much part of it, but just give some careful consideration and don't rush to buy products, was my thinking.
Yeah, I mean, this morning's session was about resilience in many ways. And so actually, it's important to think, and nobody's asked us about this, but they have asked us about the skills that asset managers need. They've asked us about, we'll do one on corporate social responsibility in a second that's been asked about. But no, I mean, you highlight the need for resilience. The infrastructure that's been there for a long, long time is relatively resilient. So if you throw the baby out with the bathwater, you're starting to lose a lot of the strength that lies behind the company. So I suppose it's finding that balance. Does everyone have to find their own balance rather than going for the new digital solutions straight away? You have to really think about what's the interplay of a successful business that's been there for a long time.
Yeah, and I think it probably leads to the CSR point about confidently investing in the things that are going to give most value to your customers and to your organization, and the sort of mutual balance that you achieve there, and setting goals that are achievable, setting some that frankly aren't. The net zero carbon is a huge challenge that we've put on the horizon, and it's only through the effective interaction between engineers, economists, technologists, and systems thinkers, and the asset manager as well, that will drive to achieve those things. And I think, to go to your point about the existing resilience, assets do deteriorate. They do need capital investment. We have, we talk about TOTEX in the water industry, where we make the balance between the operational efficiency versus the capital gain. Yeah. Realistically, there's just got to be a very careful and reassessed decision making around that, and actually over-investing in the wrong area can lead to the loss of benefit and actually not getting what we need. To your point, which was, where we've got existing infrastructure, if we've fully depleted, extracted all its value, and we're moving to the next step. But there's always that intervention point. When do you fix it? When do you replace it? When does it end its life? And I don't use, people talk about, assets going beyond their notional design life, but, there's pushing them further. And public asset managers are really good at getting more from assets that have actually overstayed, they've been there for far beyond their existing life. And that's, we need to draw on that skill, is what I'm saying.
It's a real combination of old and new, isn't it? And but I think you've really painted a picture of when to move forward, when not to move forward, but certainly that linking between the new technologies and how you handle those, and the older ones that still stay there and act as a foundation is really good. Questions here about economics, about the language that people are using in terms of asset management, also about the whether the processes need to change first, the people need to change first. I mean, you've covered a lot in your presentation. It is time to move on. Thanks very much, Neil, for your answers. Thanks to all your questions, as always. Please keep doing that. You have the box to our right, so please, throughout the day, please keep on sending in your questions. That'd be fantastic. Now, do check out also Atkins Hub for more information. You can put your questions to Neil there, and you can find out lots more information. So I think you've done a sterling job of getting us introduced. There's a lot more behind the under the bonnet. Okay, next up, we have a networking break. So do head back to the homepage and check out who's been swiping right on you, and to meet some of your fellow audience members virtually. Check out the recommended for you section to see your personalized suggestions. Lots to see and do. Now, here's a little added incentive on top of the business you may be able to do today. If you attend and hold 5 virtual meetings this week, you are automatically entered into this week's raffle competition to win £250 worth of vouchers from a retailer of your choice. Better yet, for every additional 5 meetings that you have this week, you'll be entered again. So what are you waiting for? Get those meetings scheduled now for business, also for possibly some free stuff. Okay, fantastic. You'll be notified when you need to come back. But just to let you know, we'll be back here again for our panel looking at reducing operational cost at 11:25 in 20 minutes time. See you then.